My wife said that I was terrible in bed. A friend of hers said no way, and she had a meltdown. You know that moment your entire reality just shatters? My wife handed me mine on a silver platter with one sentence: "You're terrible in bed." Ouch. But the real explosion didn't happen until her best friend leaned in, looked me dead in the eye, and said the two words that sent my marriage into a tailspin you will not believe.
Hey, story lover. Welcome to the Narrative Hub, Reddit Stories. Believe me, this adventure gets wild, but it's only epic with you. Seriously, you make this possible. Want more stories? Greater adventure? Smash subscribe right now. Smash like. Comment below. Let's go.
For 6 months, I lived in a fog. A cold, quiet fog that had settled over my marriage to Jennifer like a stubborn weather system that refused to move on. It wasn't one big storm that brought it in, it was 1,000 little things. A touch that wasn't returned. A kiss that landed on a cheek turned away at the last second. A late night at the office that felt just a little too convenient. A growing distance in a bed that suddenly felt the size of a football field, with her curled up on the very edge like I had some contagious disease. I thought maybe this is just what happens. People get comfortable, life gets in the way, passion fades into routine. I'd heard the jokes at work, the resigned sighs from married colleagues talking about their ball and chain. Maybe this was my initiation into that club I'd never wanted to join. But I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. I tried to bridge the gap with everything I had. Date nights at restaurants where we used to laugh until our sides hurt, now filled with awkward silences punctuated only by the scraping of forks against plates. Small gifts that were received with a polite, "thank you," and immediately forgotten on the kitchen counter. Weekend getaways that felt more like business trips with a reluctant colleague than romantic escapes with the woman I'd promised to love forever. I tried initiating conversations about us, about what was wrong, about how we could fix whatever was broken. Each attempt was met with a sigh, a tired excuse about work stress, or a gentle but firm redirection to some mundane household matter. Did you remember to call the plumber? The grocery list is on the fridge. I'm really tired tonight. I tried initiating. Well, physical intimacy had become a carefully choreographed dance of rejection. A hand placed on her shoulder would tense beneath my touch. A kiss attempted would meet the top of her head as she ducked away. The few times we were intimate, it felt mechanical, obligatory, like she was checking off an item on her to-do list. Get groceries, pay bills, maintain marriage through minimal physical contact. I was walking on eggshells in my own home, trying to fix a puzzle without knowing what the final picture was supposed to look like. Every gesture was calculated, every word measured, every approach tentative and apologetic before it even began. I started second-guessing everything about myself. Was I too clingy, too distant, too demanding, not demanding enough? The worst part was the gaslighting I didn't even recognize at the time. When I'd express frustration or hurt, Jennifer had a way of turning it back on me. "You're being too sensitive. You're imagining things. Maybe if you tried harder at work, you wouldn't be so focused on this stuff." She had an arsenal of tiny weapons designed to make me question my own perception of reality. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe beside me and wondering when we'd become strangers sharing the same address. I started working later not because I had to, but because coming home felt like entering a war zone where I was always on the losing side. My friends began to notice. "You okay, man? You seem off lately." But what was I supposed to say? That my wife barely tolerated my existence, that I felt like I was slowly disappearing in my own life? Instead, I smiled and said I was fine, adding another layer to the isolation that was becoming my constant companion. The diagnosis for my failing marriage, when it came, wasn't delivered in a quiet, heartfelt conversation over coffee on a Sunday morning. It wasn't whispered in the darkness of our bedroom during a rare moment of vulnerability. It was an ambush, perfectly planned and brutally executed. Jennifer had insisted we go out for her friend Lisa Johnson's birthday. At first, I was reluctant. Social gatherings had become minefields where I never knew which step would trigger an explosion. But Jennifer had been unusually insistent, almost excited about it, which should have been my first warning sign. When Jennifer got excited about something involving other people, it usually meant I was about to be used as a prop in some performance I hadn't auditioned for. It was a small gathering at a trendy tapas restaurant downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick walls, Edison bulb lighting, and a menu written in chalk that changed daily. The kind of place that charged $30 for what amounted to fancy appetizers and called it small plates dining experience. The music was loud and pulsing, designed to make you feel more interesting and sophisticated than you actually were, and the wine was flowing freely from the moment we sat down. The group consisted of Lisa and her husband Mark, another couple I vaguely knew from Jennifer's work circles, Sarah and Tom, and us. The laughter felt forced, brittle, like everyone was trying too hard to prove how much fun they were having. I recognized the pattern, a group of people who probably didn't like each other that much but were bound together by social obligation, and the shared need to document their amazing lives on social media. I was trying my best, really trying. I nodded along to stories I wasn't a part of, laughed at inside jokes that predated my involvement in Jennifer's social circle, and smiled until my cheeks ached with the effort. I ordered drinks I didn't want, ate food that tasted like expensive cardboard, and played the role of the supportive husband attending his wife's friend's birthday celebration. Sarah was going on about her recent promotion at some marketing firm, a story that involved a lot of dramatic hand gestures and wine-fueled embellishments. Tom was checking his phone every few minutes, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Mark was trying to impress everyone with his knowledge of wine, swirling and sniffing, and making little hemming noises that were supposed to indicate sophisticated appreciation. And Jennifer was performing, that's the only way to describe it. She was animated in a way I hadn't seen in months, laughing loudly at everything, touching people's arms when she talked, playing the role of the vivacious, fun-loving wife. But there was something calculating about it, something that felt rehearsed. That's when Jennifer did it. In a brief lull in the conversation, right after Sarah had finished her promotion story and everyone was reaching for their glasses in that awkward moment of social transition, Jennifer turned to the group. She let out a theatrical, long-suffering sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, and I felt my stomach drop. I knew that sigh. It was the prelude to something terrible. "I don't know how you guys do it," she said, swirling the dark red wine in her glass like she was contemplating the mysteries of the universe. Her voice carried just the right amount of wistful sadness mixed with resigned acceptance. "The passion, the spark, the connection." She gestured vaguely between the other couples with her wine glass as if they possessed some secret knowledge she'd been denied. The table went quiet, but not the comfortable quiet of people enjoying each other's company. This was the sharp-edged quiet of impending disaster. Sarah and Tom suddenly became very interested in their plates of half-eaten olives and miniature sandwiches. Mark stopped mid-swirl with his wine glass. Lisa's smile froze on her face like it had been painted there. I felt my face flush hot with a mixture of shame and anger. The heat started at my collar and crept up my neck like spilled wine on a white tablecloth. Why would she do this here? Why now? In front of these people who were barely more than acquaintances to me, it felt like being dragged onto a stage I never agreed to perform on under lights I couldn't escape. Then she looked directly at me, her eyes cold and clinical, like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. There was no warmth there, no love, no recognition of the years we'd shared or the vows we'd made, just a cold, calculated assessment that was about to destroy me in front of an audience. "Let's be honest, James," she said, her voice carrying across the table with surgical precision. "You're terrible in bed." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire, thick and suffocating. Every conversation in the restaurant seemed to pause. The ambient noise faded to nothing. Even the obnoxious pop music seemed to lower in deference to the magnitude of what had just happened. It was a direct hit, a character assassination in front of an audience, a public execution of my masculinity and my worth as a husband. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I wanted to disappear, to cease existing, to wake up and discover this was all some horrible nightmare brought on by too much stress and bad Chinese food. I could feel the pitying glances from across the table, could practically hear the mental notes being taken for future gossip sessions. "Did you hear what Jennifer said about James?" Right there at the restaurant, I felt so bad for him. I could imagine the conversations that would happen in offices and coffee shops and playgrounds, spreading like wildfire through their social circle. My own wife? The woman who had walked down an aisle toward me 7 years ago, promising to love and honor and cherish me through better and worse. The woman who had whispered, "I love you," against my neck on countless mornings, who had once told her mother that she'd won the lottery when she found me. In that moment I believed her. Every doubt, every insecurity she had carefully planted and watered over the last 6 months bloomed into a hideous garden of failure. My confidence, what little remained of it, shattered into a million pieces that scattered across the restaurant floor like broken glass. I was terrible. I was inadequate. I was failing as a husband, as a man, as a human being. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, to defend myself, to ask why, to beg for mercy, but no words came out. My vocal cords had apparently decided to go on strike at the exact moment I needed them most. I just sat there, a hollowed-out version of myself, a cardboard cutout of a man pretending to be the real thing. But before the silence could become permanent, before I could completely disintegrate under the weight of my public humiliation, something happened that no one, least of all me, saw coming. Lisa Johnson, Jennifer's best friend since college and the birthday girl whose celebration had just turned into my public execution, had been quietly listening to this whole exchange. She was the one person at the table I'd always felt genuinely liked me, who asked about my work not out of politeness but because she actually wanted to know, who remembered little details about my life and brought them up in future conversations. She had been sitting there with a strange expression on her face, something I couldn't quite read. Her wine glass was frozen halfway to her lips, and she was staring at Jennifer with a look I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, disgust, and something that looked almost like recognition. Then, without warning, she slammed her hand down on the table with such force that the cutlery jumped, the wine glasses rattled, and several nearby tables turned to stare. The sharp crack of her palm against the wood cut through the restaurant noise like a gunshot. "Are you kidding me right now?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the restaurant's din with laser precision. Her face had gone from pale to flushed in an instant, and her eyes were blazing with an anger that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. Jennifer looked stunned, like someone had just slapped her across the face. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly for a moment, her carefully constructed performance cracking like thin ice. "Lisa, what are you talking about? This is between me and my husband." The words came out with a slight slur. She'd had more wine than I'd realized, but there was a tremor in her voice that suggested she knew exactly why Lisa was reacting this way, and she was terrified about where this was heading. Lisa laughed, but it was a sharp, humorless sound like breaking glass. It was the laugh of someone who had finally reached their breaking point, who had been holding something back for far too long and was done pretending. She looked around the table at the other couples, who were now staring with the fascination of people watching a car accident in slow motion. "Between you and your husband?" Lisa repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You just humiliated him in front of all of us and you think this is private." She looked over at Jennifer's pale face, then her eyes locked onto mine. There was something in her expression I couldn't decipher, part apology, part determination, part something else entirely. A strange, unreadable mixture of emotions that made my stomach clench with anticipation. Then, she leaned forward across the table, her voice dropping to a level that somehow made it more powerful, not less, and said the two words that lit the fuse on a nuclear bomb. "No way." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Jennifer's face, which had been a mask of calculated indifference mixed with wine-induced bravado, instantly crumpled like paper in a fire. All the color drained from her cheeks so fast I thought she might faint. Pure, undiluted panic flashed in her eyes, not embarrassment, not anger, but genuine, heart-stopping terror. It was a look I had never seen before in 7 years of marriage, and it sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the restaurant's aggressive air conditioning. This wasn't the face of someone who was annoyed at being contradicted. This was the face of someone whose deepest, darkest secret had just been threatened with exposure. The silence that fell over that table wasn't just awkward. It wasn't the ordinary discomfort of witnessing a marital spat in public. This was something else entirely, the sound of my entire life changing, of foundations crumbling, of truths that had been buried so deep they'd almost become lies finally clawing their way to the surface. Sarah and Tom were no longer pretending to eat. Mark had set down his wine glass and was staring openly. Even the waitress, who had been approaching with another round of drinks, seemed to sense the tension and backed away like she'd stumbled into a crime scene. Jennifer's panic was palpable, radiating off her like heat from a fever. She was looking back and forth between Lisa and me with the trapped expression of an animal caught in headlights, her carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. "Lisa, please," she whispered, and there was something in her voice I'd never heard before, genuine desperation. Not the performative distress she used when she wanted something, but raw, naked fear. But Lisa wasn't backing down. If anything, Jennifer's reaction seemed to fuel her anger. She sat back in her chair, her arms crossed, staring at my wife with a mixture of disgust and something that looked almost like pity. "No, Jennifer," she said, her voice steady now but still carrying an edge that could cut steel. I'm done watching this, I'm done being part of this." And in that moment, sitting in that overpriced restaurant surrounded by the wreckage of what I'd thought was my life, I knew that everything was about to change. I didn't know how yet, didn't know what Lisa knew or what Jennifer was so terrified of, but I could feel it in the air like the electricity before a thunderstorm. The truth was coming, whether we were ready for it or not. The car ride home was a masterclass in psychological warfare, a 20-minute journey that felt like crossing a continent made of ice and broken glass. Jennifer didn't speak a word for the first 15 minutes. She just stared out the passenger window, her jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack under the pressure, her hands twisted together in her lap like she was trying to strangle her own fingers. The silence was louder than any screaming match we'd ever had. It was the kind of silence that has weight, that presses down on you until you feel like you're suffocating. I could hear every sound, the hum of the engine, the whisper of tires on asphalt, the tick of the turn signal that seemed to echo like a countdown to something terrible. I tried to break it once about halfway home, when the tension had become so thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Jen, what was that about? Why would you say that, in front of everyone? What were you trying to accomplish? The questions tumbled out before I could stop them, fueled by a mixture of humiliation, confusion, and the growing suspicion that I had been played in some game whose rules I didn't understand. She whipped her head around so fast I thought she might give herself whiplash, her eyes blazing with a fury I didn't understand and couldn't place. It wasn't the anger of someone who'd been caught doing something wrong. It was the rage of someone who felt cornered, threatened, exposed. "What was that about?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "What was that with Lisa? Why was she defending you like that? What have you been telling her? What have you two been doing behind my back?" I was floored, completely, utterly speechless. In the space of 10 minutes I had gone from the humiliated husband, publicly emasculated by his wife's cruel words, to the accused adulterer, somehow responsible for my own character assassination. She was flipping the script with the skill of a master manipulator, turning her own public cruelty into evidence of my supposed betrayal. It was dizzying, like being spun around until you couldn't tell which way was up. The woman who had just destroyed me in front of our friends was now making me the villain of her own story. "Jennifer, what are you talking about?" Lisa defended me because what you said was horrible and untrue. "She's your friend, she's been your friend for 15 years, I barely know her outside of these group things." But she wasn't listening. She had already constructed her narrative, and nothing I said was going to penetrate the fortress of lies she was building around herself. "Don't lie to me, James. I saw how she looked at you. I saw how quick she was to jump to your defense. People don't do that unless there's something going on." The rest of the drive passed in variations on this theme. Every attempt I made to discuss what had actually happened at the restaurant was deflected, twisted, turned into evidence of my supposed betrayal. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole, except instead of Wonderland, I'd landed in some twisted reality where up was down and victims were perpetrators. The next 2 days were a marathon of gaslighting and psychological manipulation that would have impressed a professional interrogator. I spent every waking moment trying to talk to her, to understand what was happening to our marriage, to figure out why she had chosen to humiliate me so publicly, and then blame me for the aftermath. But it was like talking to a brick wall that occasionally came to life to accuse me of infidelity. A brick wall that would periodically launch into detailed fantasies about my supposed secret affair with her best friend, complete with imagined scenarios that grew more elaborate with each repetition. "How long has it been going on?" she would demand, standing in our kitchen with her arms crossed, looking like a prosecutor cross-examining a hostile witness. "Nothing is going on, Jennifer. Nothing has ever been going on. Lisa is your friend. I've never been alone with her, never called her, never texted her. I don't even have her number." That's exactly what someone having an affair would say. It was maddening. Every denial was taken as proof of guilt. Every attempt to redirect the conversation back to her behavior at the restaurant was met with fresh accusations. She had created a closed loop of logic where my innocence was evidence of my guilt, and my attempts to prove my innocence only made me look more guilty. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own emotional aftermath from the restaurant incident. The words "you're terrible in bed" kept echoing in my head like a song you can't get rid of. They had burrowed into my brain and taken up permanent residence, coloring every thought, every memory, every moment of self-reflection. Was I terrible? Had I been fooling myself all these years? The cruel efficiency of her public statement had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had made me question everything about myself as a man and as a partner. Sleep became even more elusive as I replayed every intimate moment of our marriage, looking for evidence that she was right, that I had been failing her in ways I was too blind or selfish to see. She was isolating me with surgical precision, painting me as the villain to escape any responsibility for her own actions. It was a masterful campaign of emotional warfare, designed to keep me so off balance and defensive that I couldn't focus on the real issues: her behavior, her cruelty, the growing mountain of evidence that something was fundamentally wrong with our marriage. But Lisa's reaction kept nagging at me. The way she had exploded, the specific words she had chosen, the look of pure panic that had crossed Jennifer's face, it all pointed to something bigger than a simple disagreement about my bedroom skills. Meanwhile, Lisa was a ghost. I called her once despite knowing it would probably make Jennifer's paranoid fantasies worse. The call went straight to voicemail. I texted her a simple "thank you for standing up for me, I hope you're okay." No response, complete radio silence. It was clear Jennifer had gotten to her, had called her the moment we left the restaurant, threatening their friendship, poisoning her against me, making sure she understood that any further contact with me would be seen as betrayal of the highest order. I realized with a sickening lurch that I was alone in this. Whatever was happening, whatever Jennifer was hiding, whatever Lisa knew that had made her react so violently, I was going to have to figure it out by myself. Jennifer's meltdown at the restaurant wasn't just about a careless comment or a friend overstepping boundaries. It was about a gate being unlocked, a door being cracked open, a secret being threatened with exposure. Lisa's two words, "no way," were a key, and Jennifer was terrified of what was behind that door. I knew then, with the certainty that comes from finally seeing a picture that had been right in front of you all along, that this was never about my skills in the bedroom. It was never about my inadequacies as a husband or my failures as a man. It was about a lie she was desperate to keep buried, a truth so damaging to her carefully constructed narrative that she was willing to destroy me to protect it. And I was going to dig it all up, no matter how long it took or how much it hurt. My investigation started small, like most discoveries that end up changing everything. I wasn't looking for proof of an affair or evidence of betrayal. I was just trying to understand the woman I had married, the woman who had become a stranger in the space of 6 months. I was looking for a needle in a haystack without even knowing what the needle looked like, searching for clues to a puzzle I couldn't quite visualize. But I had learned something important about investigations from years of watching crime shows during our happier times, back when we used to curl up on the couch together and Jennifer would guess the killer by the second commercial break. The truth is usually hidden in plain sight, disguised as normalcy. I started paying attention to the details I had let slide for months, the small inconsistencies that I had dismissed as unimportant or explained away with the generous assumptions of a trusting husband. The way she guarded her phone, angling it away from me whenever a text came in, her fingers moving quickly to dismiss notifications before I could catch a glimpse of the sender's name. Her laptop, which used to sit open on our kitchen counter like a communal resource, now disappeared into her home office the moment she was done with it, password protected and suspicious of any casual glances. She had started doing her personal email on her phone, claiming it was more convenient, but I noticed she never did it when I was in the room. The credit card statements became particularly interesting once I started actually looking at them instead of just filing them away. Charges from coffee shops and restaurants I'd never heard of, always during her late nights at the office. A pattern of expenditures that suggested a second life, a parallel existence that ran alongside our marriage like a shadow. Italian villa, $67.50, Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. But she had told me she was working late on the Henderson account and would grab something from the vending machine. Starbucks on 5th Street, $8.25, Thursday, 2:15 p.m. But 5th Street was nowhere near her office and she claimed she was in back-to-back meetings all afternoon. The Riverside Inn, $156, Saturday, 1:45 p.m. A hotel charge on a day she said she was shopping for her mother's birthday present. Each charge was small, innocuous on its own, but together they painted a picture that was blurry and incomplete but unmistakably wrong. It was like looking at a photograph through water. You could make out the general shapes, but the details remained frustratingly unclear. Was she cheating? It seemed like the obvious answer, the explanation that would make all the pieces fit neatly together. A guilty wife pushing away her husband, creating distance and resentment to justify her betrayal. It was a story I'd heard before, played out in countless movies and books and whispered conversations in office break rooms. But it didn't explain Lisa's reaction at the restaurant. It didn't explain the specific, panicked terror in Jennifer's eyes when her friend had defended me. If Jennifer was simply having an affair, why would Lisa, her best friend, her confidant, presumably the person she would turn to for support and understanding, react with such explosive anger? It was something else. Something deeper, more complicated, more damaging than a simple case of marital infidelity. The pieces I was finding didn't fit together in any pattern I recognized, like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with pieces from 3 different boxes. I started paying closer attention to her conversations, both the ones she had with me and the ones she had when she thought I wasn't listening. Her stories about work became increasingly detailed and elaborate, full of names and projects and deadlines that never quite added up. She would mention meetings with clients I'd never heard of, reference conversations with colleagues whose names changed from one telling to the next. Her phone calls, which used to happen openly in whatever room she found herself in, now required privacy. She would take them in her office with the door closed, or step outside to the backyard, or suddenly remember she needed something from her car. The conversations were always brief, always whispered, always followed by a period of distraction and anxiety that could last for hours. I tried to be strategic about it, to pay attention without seeming like I was spying, to gather information without triggering the paranoid defenses that had become her default mode. But it was exhausting, living like a detective in my own home, analyzing every word and gesture for hidden meaning. The worst part was the growing certainty that I was being played, that I had been cast in some elaborate performance without knowing my role or understanding the script. Every conversation felt scripted, every interaction calculated, every moment of apparent intimacy or vulnerability immediately followed by a withdrawal that left me more confused than before. I started keeping notes, writing down times and dates and details in a small notebook I hid in my desk drawer at work. It felt paranoid and desperate, like something a crazy person would do, but it was the only way I could make sense of the contradictions that had become my daily life. March 15th claims she's working late on Peterson presentation. Credit card shows dinner at Romano's at 8:30 p.m. Romano's is 45 minutes from her office. March 22nd says she has early morning meeting with new client. Leaves house at 7 a.m. wearing dress I've never seen before. Returns at 6 p.m. with shopping bags but claims she went straight to office after meeting. March 28th, phone rings during dinner, steps outside to answer. Conversation lasts 20 minutes. Says it was her mother, but when I mention it to her mother later, she has no idea what I'm talking about. The notebook filled up slowly but steadily, a catalog of lies and inconsistencies that painted a portrait of a marriage built on deception. But still, I couldn't see the full picture. I had the edges of the puzzle, some of the corner pieces, but the center, the image that would make everything else make sense, remained stubbornly unclear. After a week of unanswered calls and radio silence that felt like being slowly suffocated, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message was brief and dramatic, like something from a spy movie. Meet me at the park on Green Street, 3 p.m., come alone. I stared at the text for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I knew it was from Lisa. Who else would contact me anonymously? Who else would request a clandestine meeting in a public place? But the cloak and dagger nature of it made me nervous. If she was willing to risk Jennifer's wrath by meeting with me, whatever she had to say was going to be significant. Green Street Park was one of those small urban oases that cities create to convince themselves they care about nature. A few acres of grass and trees wedged between office buildings and apartment complexes, with a duck pond that always smelled faintly of algae and benches that had seen better decades. I arrived 10 minutes early, partly from nervousness and partly from the desperate hope that maybe, finally, someone would give me answers instead of more questions. I sat on a bench near the pond, watching office workers eat lunch and parents chase toddlers, trying to look casual while my stomach churned with anticipation and dread. Lisa appeared exactly at 3 o'clock, walking toward me across the grass with the determined stride of someone who had made a difficult decision and was committed to seeing it through. But as she got closer, I could see the toll the last week had taken on her. She looked exhausted, older somehow, like she had aged years in the span of 7 days. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested sleep had become as elusive for her as it had for me. She was wearing jeans and an oversized sweatshirt instead of her usual carefully curated outfits, like she had given up on maintaining appearances. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat down beside me, her voice carrying a weariness that spoke to battles fought and lost. "I wasn't sure you would." "Are you kidding? After what happened at the restaurant, after a week of Jennifer accusing me of having an affair with you, I'd have met you on the moon if you'd asked." She managed a weak smile at that, but it didn't reach her eyes. "She called me that night, the moment you two left the restaurant. She was furious. She said I had embarrassed her, that I had undermined her marriage, that I had chosen you over 15 years of friendship." Lisa paused, staring out at the duck pond where a family of mallards was paddling in lazy circles, seemingly oblivious to the human drama unfolding on the nearby bench. "She forbade me from ever speaking to you again," Lisa continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "She said that any contact between us would be seen as proof that we were having an affair, that she would make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was, that she would destroy my reputation and my marriage if I didn't stay away from you." The words hit me like physical blows. Jennifer hadn't just been paranoid about Lisa and me, she had actively worked to isolate me, to cut off the one person who had stood up for me, to make sure I remained alone and defenseless against her psychological warfare. "I can't do this anymore, James," Lisa said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion she was trying hard to control. "I can't watch what she's doing to you, I can't be part of it. I can't pretend anymore that this is normal or okay or something that friends do to each other." "What is she doing, Lisa? What is going on?" I pleaded, turning to face her fully. The desperation in my voice was embarrassing, but I was beyond caring about pride or dignity. "How would you know if she was lying about, Lisa took a deep breath, steeling herself like someone preparing to jump off a high diving board. She looked around the park as if checking for surveillance, then turned back to me with the expression of someone who had decided to burn their bridges and was committed to watching them flame. "Because for the last 3 years, all she has done is complain to me," she said, the words coming out in a rush like she needed to get them out before she lost her courage. "But not about you being bad. She complained that you were good, that you were attentive, that you wanted her, that you still looked at her like you were newlyweds, that you still brought her flowers for no reason and remembered little anniversaries that most husbands forget after the first year." I felt like I was falling through space, like the bench had disappeared beneath me and I was tumbling through a reality that made no sense. "That makes no sense. Why would she push me away and then blame me for it? Why would she complain about me being a good husband?" Lisa's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I thought she was going to stand up and walk away, leaving me with half an answer and a dozen new questions. But she stayed, her hands twisted together in her lap, her voice growing steadier as she prepared to deliver the bomb that would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my wife. "Because of David Jones," she said quietly, the name falling between us like a stone into still water. The name hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the solar plexus that left me gasping for breath. David Jones. I knew that name, had heard it mentioned in passing conversations about Jennifer's old job, but I had never paid much attention to the casual references to colleagues and office politics that were part of her daily stories. David Jones was a colleague from her old firm, a guy she'd mentioned occasionally in the early years of our marriage. A smooth-talking account executive with too much charm and too little substance. The kind of man who wore expensive suits and drove a convertible and seemed to think the world owed him something for existing. She had always spoken of him with mild disdain, the way you talk about someone you find mildly annoying but have to work with professionally. He had left the company about 3 years ago, right around the time Jennifer's behavior toward me had started to change, though I had never connected the two events. Why would I? He was just another face in the revolving door of corporate America, another ambitious climber who had moved on to what he probably thought were better opportunities. "What about him?" I asked, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The ducks on the pond seemed to have stopped moving, the world around us frozen in anticipation of whatever Lisa was about to reveal. Lisa looked at me with a mixture of pity and determination, like a doctor preparing to deliver a terminal diagnosis. Early in your marriage, she began, her voice careful and measured. You two went through a rough patch. Do you remember? It was about 4 years ago. You were working crazy hours trying to make partner at your firm, and Jennifer felt neglected, ignored, like she was married to a ghost who happened to sleep in her bed occasionally. I did remember. It had been a difficult time for both of us, one of those periods that every marriage goes through where life gets in the way of love and you find yourself living parallel lives instead of a shared one. I had been consumed by work. Desperate to prove myself worthy of partnership, staying at the office until midnight and coming home too exhausted to be the husband Jennifer deserved. She had tried to talk to me about it, had attempted to explain how lonely she felt, how disconnected from our life together. But I had been too tired, too stressed, too focused on what I thought was our future to pay attention to our present. I had dismissed her concerns as temporary, promised that things would get better once I made partner, once the big case was finished, once the crisis at work was resolved. It was the classic mistake of a man who thinks love is something you can put on hold while you handle more pressing matters, who believes that marriage is sturdy enough to survive neglect as long as the foundation is solid. I had been wrong, obviously, but I thought we had worked through it. I thought we had come out stronger on the other side. She felt distant from you, Lisa continued, her voice growing quieter, more hesitant. She said you were like roommates who occasionally had sex, that you looked through her instead of at her, that she felt invisible in her own marriage. The words stung because they were probably true. I had been so focused on building what I thought was our future that I had forgotten to pay attention to our present. I had taken Jennifer for granted, assumed she would be there when I finally had time to be the husband she deserved. She went on a business trip, Lisa said, and something in her tone made my blood turn to ice water. A conference in Chicago. It was a big industry event, lots of networking, lots of alcohol, lots of people feeling sophisticated and important and temporarily freed from the constraints of their normal lives. I knew the conference she was talking about. Jennifer had been excited about it, had seen it as an opportunity to make connections and advance her career. I had been supportive, proud of her professional ambitions, happy that she was pursuing something that made her feel valued and important. I had even bought her a new dress for the gala dinner, told her she looked beautiful, kissed her goodbye at the airport with promises to take better care of our marriage when she returned. David was there, Lisa said simply, and those 3 words contained multitudes. The pieces of the puzzle began slamming into place with brutal, sickening clarity, each revelation hitting me like a physical blow. The timeline, the change in Jennifer's behavior, the sudden distance, the rejection, the constant criticism that had seemed to come from nowhere. It was one night, Lisa continued, her voice barely audible now. A single, stupid mistake after too much wine and too much feeling sorry for herself and too much validation from a man who made her feel desirable when her own husband had made her feel invisible. The world tilted sideways. I felt like I was going to be sick, like my body was rejecting this information at a cellular level. Jennifer, my Jennifer, the woman who had promised to forsake all others, who had looked me in the eye at our wedding and vowed to be faithful until death do us part. She told you this? I managed to ask, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. She called me from the hotel room, Lisa said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. She was hysterical, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She said she had made the biggest mistake of her life, that she had destroyed everything good about her marriage, that she didn't know how she was going to live with herself. I sat there on that park bench feeling like I was dissolving from the inside out. The woman I had loved and trusted and built a life with had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. And this was somehow worse, she had spent 3 years making me pay for her sin. But she never told you, Lisa continued, and there was something in her voice now that sounded almost angry. Instead of facing what she had done, instead of giving you the choice of whether to forgive her or leave her, she buried it. She decided that the best way to deal with her guilt was to make it your fault somehow. The pattern became clear with horrifying precision. The distance, the rejection, the constant, subtle belittling that had made me question everything about myself as a man and as a husband. It wasn't about me at all. It had never been about me. She's been consumed by guilt ever since, Lisa explained, her voice growing stronger as she found her rhythm, as if finally telling this story was lifting a weight she had been carrying for years. But instead of facing it, instead of dealing with what she had done, she buried it so deep that she almost convinced herself it never happened. Almost. She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. looking out at the pond where the ducks had resumed their lazy paddling, oblivious to the human drama unfolding on the nearby bench. But she couldn't quite forget, could she? Every time you were kind to her, every time you brought her flowers or told her you loved her or tried to be intimate with her, it reminded her of what she had done. Every gesture of love from you was like a knife twisted in the wound of her own guilt. The psychological mechanism was brilliant in its cruelty. Jennifer couldn't live with the knowledge of what she had done, but she also couldn't forget it. So instead of confessing and asking for forgiveness, she had chosen a different path. She had decided to make me the problem. If you were terrible, Lisa continued, if you were inadequate as a husband, if you were failing to meet her needs, then the distance between you wasn't her fault. It wasn't because she had betrayed you and couldn't live with the guilt. It was because you weren't good enough for her. The marriage was failing because of your shortcomings, not because of her betrayal. I understood now why she had pushed me away sexually. Every time we were intimate, every moment of vulnerability and connection, it reminded her that she was living a lie. It made her feel like a fraud, like she was stealing something she no longer deserved. So she had created distance, made excuses, turned our bedroom into a battlefield where I was always the loser. The gaslighting, Lisa said, and there was real anger in her voice now, was just the logical next step. If you were going to be the problem, then you needed to believe it too. You needed to question yourself, to doubt your own perceptions, to accept that you were failing as a husband. Because if you didn't believe it, if you pushed back or demanded answers, you might stumble across the real reason for the distance between you. It was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, a campaign of emotional warfare designed to protect her secret by destroying my sense of self. Every cruel comment, every rejection, every moment of manufactured disappointment had been calculated to make me the scapegoat for her own sins. Her saying that at the restaurant, Lisa continued, her voice hardening with disgust, claiming you were terrible in bed in front of all those people, that was the peak of 3 years of gaslighting. It was her trying to make her version of reality the official version, trying to get witnesses to confirm that you were the problem in your marriage. The public humiliation hadn't been a moment of wine-fueled honesty. It had been a strategic move, an attempt to solidify the narrative she had been building for 3 years. If she could get other people to see me as inadequate, if she could make my failures a matter of public record, then her version of our marriage would become the truth. I couldn't listen to it anymore, Lisa said, her voice breaking with emotion. I couldn't let her destroy you just to quiet the ghosts in her own head. I've watched her systematically tear you down for 3 years, watched you become a shadow of the man I used to know, watched you start to believe the lies she was telling about you. I sat on that park bench, the world spinning around me like a carnival ride I couldn't get off. The woman I loved, the woman who had systematically dismantled my self-worth piece by piece, had done it all to hide her own betrayal. It wasn't just an affair. It was a campaign of psychological destruction designed to make me the scapegoat for her own sins. The vindication I felt was instantly smothered by a wave of profound, soul-crushing sadness. The marriage I had been fighting for, the love I had been trying to salvage, the relationship I had been willing to blame myself for destroying, none of it had ever existed. It was all a lie, a performance, an elaborate fiction designed to protect her from the consequences of her own choices. I'm sorry, Lisa whispered, and I could see that she meant it, that carrying this secret had been eating away at her too. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I kept thinking she would tell you herself, that she would find the courage to confess and try to make things right. But she just kept getting deeper and deeper into the lie until destroying you became easier than facing the truth. I thanked her, though the words felt inadequate for what she had just given me. She had risked her friendship, defied Jennifer's threats, put herself in danger of retaliation, all to give me the truth I needed to save my own sanity. As she walked away across the grass, disappearing back into her own complicated life, I sat alone on that bench and tried to figure out what to do with the knowledge that would change everything. That night I came home and found Jennifer in the living room, curled up on our sectional sofa like she belonged there, like she had every right to the comfort and security of the home we had built together. She was scrolling through her phone with the casual indifference of someone who had no idea that her entire world was about to collapse, wearing the oversized sweater I had bought her for Christmas 2 years ago, back when I still believed we had a future together. The irony wasn't lost on me. There she was, wrapped in a gift from the husband she had betrayed, sitting in the living room of the house we had chosen together, probably scrolling through social media posts about other people's perfect relationships while living a lie that had poisoned ours from the inside. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her. She looked so normal, so innocent, so much like the woman I had fallen in love with 8 years ago. It was hard to reconcile this peaceful domestic scene with the psychological warfare she had been waging against me for 3 years. How many nights had I come home to find her exactly like this, never knowing that every casual interaction was part of an elaborate performance designed to keep me from discovering the truth. I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I didn't storm into the room with accusations flying and demand immediate answers. Instead, my voice was eerily calm, flat, emotionless, the voice of someone who had moved beyond anger into something much more dangerous, absolute clarity. I spoke to Lisa, I said simply, and watched as those 4 words landed like grenades in our perfectly appointed living room. Jennifer's head snapped up from her phone, the color draining from her face so quickly I thought she might actually faint. Her hand tightened around the phone until her knuckles went white, and I could see her mind racing, trying to calculate how much Lisa had told me, how much damage had been done, how she could possibly control this situation that was spiraling beyond her ability to manage. That look of pure panic was back, the same expression I had seen at the restaurant when Lisa had defended me, the same terror I had glimpsed in unguarded moments over the past week. But now I understood what she was afraid of. It wasn't my imaginary affair with her best friend. It was the truth about her very real affair with David Jones. I told you not to, she started, but her voice cracked on the words, betraying the fear that was coursing through her system like poison. I don't want to talk about Lisa, I interrupted, my voice low and steady, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. I walked over to the chair opposite the sofa, the chair that had become my designated spot during the cold months of our dying marriage, and sat down with deliberate calm. I want to talk about us, I continued, never taking my eyes off her face. About the last 3 years, about all the nights you turned away from me like I was carrying some contagious disease, about all the times you made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I was failing you in some fundamental way I couldn't identify or fix. She started to protest, to twist it back on me the way she had done countless times before, but I held up a hand to stop her. The gesture was simple, but something in my demeanor, the calm certainty, the quiet authority of someone who finally knew the truth, made her close her mouth and wait. I know I'm not the problem, Jennifer, I said, letting each word land with precision. And you know it too, you've always known it. Every cruel word, every rejection, every moment of manufactured distance, it was never about me, was it? The silence that followed was different from all the other silences in our house over the past months. This wasn't the cold, punitive quiet she used as a weapon, or the awkward pause of people who no longer knew how to talk to each other. This was the silence of someone whose deepest secret was being excavated, whose carefully constructed world was crumbling in real time. I could see her trying to formulate a response, cycling through the various deflection strategies she had perfected over the years. Deny everything, turn it back on me, make this about Lisa. Make this about my paranoia, my jealousy, my inability to trust her. But something in my expression must have told her that those tactics weren't going to work anymore, that the game was over and she had lost. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, watching her composure crumble like a sandcastle hit by waves. Then I asked the question that I knew would end it all, the words that would force her to finally face what she had done. What happened with David Jones? The effect was instantaneous and devastating. A sob escaped her, not the careful, calculated tears she had used to manipulate me in the past, but a raw, ragged sound that seemed to be torn from the deepest part of her soul. It was the sound of someone whose last line of defense had just been obliterated, whose secret shame was finally being dragged into the light. Her face crumpled like paper in a fire, all the careful composure and practiced innocence dissolving into ugly, desperate grief. The phone fell from her hands and clattered onto the hardwood floor, forgotten in the face of this moment she had been dreading for 3 years. James, she started, but the words dissolved into sobs that shook her entire body. And then, like a dam bursting under too much pressure, the confession came pouring out. 3 years of buried guilt, suppressed shame, and psychological manipulation all came flooding out at once, mixed with tears and desperate apologies and pleas for forgiveness she had no right to ask for. The business trip to Chicago, the conference she had been so excited about, the opportunity for professional advancement that I had supported and encouraged, the hotel bar where successful people went to network and feel important, the wine flowing freely, the atmosphere of sophisticated adultery that these events always seemed to foster. David Jones, charming and handsome and everything I wasn't in that moment, present, attentive, interested in her stories, making her feel desirable and important and seen. The validation she had been craving from a husband who had been too busy building their future to pay attention to their present. The hotel room? The mistake that lasted one night but poisoned 3 years of marriage. The immediate regret, the panicked phone call to Lisa, the desperate promises to herself that it would never happen again, that she would find a way to live with what she had done. But she couldn't live with it, could she? The guilt had eaten away at her like acid, making every moment of normalcy feel like a lie, every gesture of love from me feel like undeserved kindness. So instead of confessing and asking for forgiveness, she had chosen a different path. She had decided to make it my fault. The psychological campaign began subtly. Little comments about how we weren't as close as we used to be, suggestions that maybe I wasn't meeting her needs the way I had before, creating distance and then blaming me for not bridging it, rejecting my attempts at intimacy and then suggesting that maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. It escalated over time, as these things do. The gaslighting became more systematic, more cruel, more designed to make me question my own perceptions of reality. Every problem in our marriage was traced back to my inadequacies, my failures, my inability to be the husband she deserved. She admitted it all: the years of lies, the systematic destruction of my self-esteem, the campaign to make me the villain in the story of our marriage. She had torn our marriage down, brick by painful brick, because she couldn't live with herself, and destroying me had been easier than facing what she had done. I listened to it all, feeling nothing but a vast, cold emptiness where my love for her used to live. When she was done, sobbing and begging for a forgiveness I didn't have to give, I stood up from the chair that had witnessed the death of our marriage. There was nothing left to say. No words that could undo 3 years of psychological warfare, no apology that could repair the damage she had done to my sense of self, no explanation that could make sense of how the woman I loved had become my tormentor. The truth hadn't set me free, it had just shown me the walls of my prison, but at least now I knew who had built them. I walked out of that house and I didn't look back, not metaphorically, literally. I didn't turn around to see if she was watching from the window, didn't pause at the end of our driveway to take one last look at the life I was leaving behind. I just got in my car and drove, with no destination in mind except away. The months that followed were a masterclass in how to rebuild a human being from the ground up. It's funny, you don't realize how much psychological damage you've absorbed until you're finally free from the source of it. It's like living with a constant headache for so long that you forget what it feels like not to be in pain. The divorce proceedings were ugly but necessary, a final purging of the lies that had defined our marriage for 3 years. Jennifer tried, even then, to control the narrative. She painted herself as the victim of my sudden abandonment, conveniently leaving out the 3 years of psychological warfare that had preceded it. She told anyone who would listen that I had given up on our marriage without trying to work things out, as if the work I had done to save us while she systematically destroyed my self-worth didn't count. But Lisa backed up my story, and eventually other friends began to see through Jennifer's performance. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when someone has spent years trying to bury it. I found a therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, a woman in her 50s who specialized in psychological abuse recovery. I was resistant at first, convinced that therapy was for people with real problems, not for men who had simply married the wrong woman. But Dr. Martinez helped me understand that what I had experienced was real abuse, just psychological instead of physical. Gaslighting, she explained during one of our early sessions, is designed to make you question your own reality. When someone systematically contradicts your perceptions, dismisses your feelings, and rewrites history to make you the villain, it's not just cruel, it's a form of psychological torture. The healing process was slower than I wanted but necessary. I had to relearn how to trust my own perceptions, how to believe in my own worth, how to recognize the difference between love and manipulation. I had to grieve not just the end of my marriage, but the years of my life that had been stolen by someone else's guilt and cowardice. I started running again, something I had given up when Jennifer complained that my exercise schedule was selfish and took time away from our relationship. I joined a book club, made new friends who knew nothing about my failed marriage, learned to enjoy my own company without feeling like I was failing at something. Slowly, painfully, I began to remember who I had been before 3 years of systematic psychological destruction had convinced me I was inadequate in every way that mattered. The confident man who had proposed to Jennifer with absolute certainty that we belonged together. The successful professional who had earned respect and admiration from his colleagues. The loyal friend and devoted son who had built meaningful relationships based on mutual care and respect. That man was still in there, buried under years of manufactured self-doubt, but not destroyed, not permanently damaged, just lost for a while. I started dating again about a year after the divorce was finalized. Nothing serious at first, coffee dates and casual dinners with women who didn't know my history, who saw me as I was rather than as the failure Jennifer had convinced me I was. It was terrifying at first, putting myself out there, risking rejection from someone who might confirm Jennifer's assessment of my inadequacies. But something amazing happened instead. I discovered that I was actually quite good at relationships when I wasn't with someone who was actively working to sabotage them. I was attentive without being clingy, romantic without being desperate, confident without being arrogant. The skills Jennifer had convinced me I lacked had been there all along, they had just been buried under years of gaslighting and psychological manipulation. I met Rebecca at a charity event about 18 months after my divorce. She was funny and smart and kind, and when I told her my story, not immediately, but after we had been dating for a few months, she was horrified by what Jennifer had done to me. "That's not love," she said simply, and the clarity of that statement hit me like a revelation. Love doesn't tear you down to build itself up. Love doesn't punish you for someone else's mistakes. What she did to you wasn't love, it was abuse. We've been together for 2 years now, and I'm constantly amazed by how different a healthy relationship feels. Rebecca builds me up instead of tearing me down. She communicates directly instead of through manipulation and guilt. When we have problems, we solve them together instead of using them as weapons against each other. I still have moments of self-doubt, times when Jennifer's voice echoes in my head telling me I'm not enough. But they're getting rarer, and when they do surface, I have tools to recognize them for what they are: the lingering effects of psychological abuse, not objective assessments of my worth. I heard through mutual friends that Jennifer and David Jones got together about 6 months after our divorce was finalized. Apparently, they had been in contact the whole time, their one-night mistake having evolved into a full-blown emotional affair that predated even my discovery of their physical betrayal. She had been living a double life for years, and I had been too trusting or too naive to see it. They're engaged now, planning a wedding that will probably be beautiful and perfect and completely hollow, built on the foundation of lies and betrayal that destroyed my marriage to her. I feel sorry for David, actually. He thinks he's marrying someone who chose him over me, but he's actually marrying someone who spent 3 years psychologically torturing her husband rather than face her own guilt. That kind of character flaw doesn't disappear with a change of partner, it just finds new targets. I don't wish them ill exactly, but I don't wish them well either. I've learned that some people are simply too damaged, too selfish, too committed to their own victimhood to be capable of healthy relationships. Jennifer is one of those people, and David is about to learn that lesson the hard way. Reality shatters in a moment with a few simple words. "You're terrible in bed." 4 words that seemed to define my worth as a man and as a husband, that confirmed every insecurity I had developed over months of systematic psychological warfare. But the real shattering came later with Lisa's 2-word response: "No way." Those words cracked open the facade Jennifer had been maintaining, revealed the lie she had been living, and set in motion the chain of events that would eventually set me free. Not free in some metaphorical sense, literally free from a prison of manipulation and gaslighting that I had been living in for 3 years without even realizing it. The truth about Jennifer's affair with David Jones was devastating, but it was also liberating. For 3 years, I had been trying to solve a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit, trying to fix a marriage that was broken by forces I couldn't identify or understand. Learning about the affair didn't make the betrayal hurt less, but it did make everything else make sense. I wasn't terrible in bed. I wasn't inadequate as a husband. I wasn't failing to meet my wife's needs or falling short as a partner. I was being systematically destroyed by someone who had chosen psychological warfare over honesty, who had decided that destroying me was easier than facing her own guilt. Rebuilding from that kind of damage is not a quick process. It's not something you can fix with a vacation or a new haircut or a motivational speech from a friend. It requires professional help, honest self-reflection, and the kind of patience with yourself that feels impossible when you're desperate to feel normal again. But rebuilding is possible. The man Jennifer convinced me I was inadequate, undesirable, fundamentally flawed was never real. He was a fictional character she created to justify her own betrayal, a scapegoat for her guilt and shame. The real me was buried under years of manipulation but not destroyed. I think about those 6 months of confusion and self-doubt when I was walking on eggshells in my own home and questioning everything about myself. I think about all the men who might be living that reality right now, blamed for the distance in their relationships, convinced they're failing as husbands and partners, not realizing they're victims of systematic psychological abuse. Gaslighting is insidious because it's invisible. Physical abuse leaves marks that can be photographed and documented. Financial abuse creates paper trails that can be tracked and proven. But psychological abuse lives in the space between words, in the careful manipulation of perception and reality, in the slow erosion of confidence and self-worth. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you're constantly apologizing for things you're not sure you did wrong, if you're walking on eggshells to avoid conflicts you don't understand, if you're questioning your own memories and perceptions because your partner tells you you're wrong about your own experiences, please know that you're not crazy. You're not overly sensitive. You're not imagining things. You might be in an abusive relationship that doesn't look like the ones in movies and television shows. Abuse doesn't always involve raised voices or broken dishes or police reports. Sometimes it's quiet and systematic and designed to convince you that you deserve it. Lisa's courage in speaking up, in risking her friendship with Jennifer to tell me the truth, quite literally saved my life. Not in a dramatic, suicide prevention way, but in the sense that I was slowly disappearing under the weight of manufactured inadequacy. I was becoming a shadow of myself, accepting a version of reality that had been carefully constructed to protect someone else's secrets. Her 2 words, "no way," were the beginning of my freedom. They were the crack in the wall that eventually brought the whole structure of lies tumbling down. I'm writing this story not for sympathy or validation, but for the men and women who might be living in their own version of my prison. You don't have to accept someone else's version of your reality. You don't have to carry the weight of problems you didn't create. You don't have to sacrifice your sanity to protect someone else's secrets. Reality shatters in a moment with a few simple words. But rebuilding it, that takes time, courage, and the willingness to believe that you deserve better than a life built on lies. You have to do it piece by painful piece, day by difficult day, until you can finally look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back at you. The person you were before someone else convinced you that you were the problem. The person you still are, underneath all the damage and doubt and manufactured inadequacy. That person is worth saving. That person deserves love, real love, not the counterfeit version that tears you down to build itself up. That person is still in there, waiting to be remembered.